Hi folks, you're with us today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the various claims that are doing the rounds of the media and the propagandists about the jobs that are threatened by artificial intelligence, AI, and the extent to which this may affect society and how information is distributed and what form that information should take. Potentially the shifts are seismic, but let's have a little look. Now, I'm old enough, in my lifetime, and I'm not that old, but in my lifetime, I remember as a kid, like at school, there was media articles on the news and in the newspapers and so on. This is pre-internet, of course, but where it talked about levels of factory automation, that levels of automation were increasing and would increase as the cost of machinery was coming down, whereas the cost of labour was going up. So the prognostication about the future was that machines would replace workers in larger industrial concerns and in factories. So there was this view of what will people do, and clearly, everyone's going to be working a two-day week, and there's going to be mass unemployment, and there's going to be this, there's going to be that, and there was some hysteria about it. And at the time when trade unions actually represented workers rather than were part of the globalist establishment, the trade unions were rightly concerned about this, and I thought overreacted quite a bit. But anyway, that was sort of one thing that I remember. And we could go back even further to when the Industrial Revolution kicked off, and when the spinning jenny came in, and when the internal combustion engine came along, or the steam train and things like that. There was all sorts of talk when the steam train came in, because the key method of shipping any distance, of moving goods around for any distance, was through ships or through smaller boats operating on canals and rivers and that sort of thing. So there was all sorts of drama going on in the media that these people would all be put out of work, that horses and carriages would be gone, and this sort of thing. So there's typically overreactions that happens. The next thing I remember was the talk about robotisation when it came in. And I remember going around to various factories around the world, and I went to one of the first, I'm only a young guy at this point, but I went to one of the first robotised, for fully, as they called it, robotised then, factories in Japan, and it's very, very impressive. And I was like, wow. If this is in an assembly or a production line, if things needed to be taken to one part of the factory, it would be loaded on in a central depot, and then this caddy sort of robot carriage thing would follow a painted metallic line on the floor, would take the things right over to the workstation or work area or assembly area where they were needed. And so there was quite a lot of robotisation, which cut out labour. But more importantly than cutting out labour, it was more efficient from a viewpoint of, this was a car factory I was looking at, but they could produce, I'll just use round numbers here. So they're producing 100 cars a day, but by robotising, they could produce 115 cars a day and do it at a lower price than it cost 100. So the robotisation thing was real. There have been subsets of the robotisation up until the present day, when, say, robots can be used to help elderly people with mobility issues, things like that, and that'll take the pressure off an ageing society and the need for workers to care workers to be looking after aged and infirm people, or take away certain, be able to do certain tasks, maybe delivering food or preparing a meal, bringing liquid, or able to alert medical workers to come and help us. Yes, an elderly person who's fallen over or had a heart attack or something like that. So there was robotisation was the next big thing. Did these things, particularly in the modern era, have the effect that some claimed? Now, there are a few things that happened. So starting at the beginning with say factory automation, there were some effects, but then in general the factories became larger, so they employed more workers overall. So was there an effect? There was, but not the sort of effect that you'd think. And the retirement age was reduced during this time, so that cushioned some of the effect of any workers that might have been displaced. And people had the option of retraining on using the machines and using different disciplines and manufacturing methodologies and so on but again, the amount of workers quite substantially increased, even though the automation came in, because the overall amount of people employed in manufacturing and in the again, the scale of the enterprises tended to mean that the people were just moved around rather than got rid of. So so that was one of the effects, but the effect was nowhere near what was thought. Now, did new workers come into the manufacturing industry? That was where the main difference was. So younger people entering the industry, looking for a career in it, that dropped off considerably, and that's where I think the difference came. So when the numbers came that there used to be 100,000 working in manufacture, but now there's 99,000 or 90. It's because young people weren't coming into it rather than the older people were being moved out. Looking at the robotisation thing, that happened quite slowly and over a period of time, and as robots became more complex and capable of doing more tasks, so I again came back to motor vehicle manufacturing. It needed somebody to come and pick up one part, turn it over, and then insert it into another machine, whereas robots could do that. So they could pick up a part, spin it around, turn it, and then insert it into the next step of the production process. So people were being eliminated there. They weren't necessarily skilled personnel anyway, and as labourers as such, they could do other things. So again, it was moving people around within the wider workforce rather than just completely neutralising one group of workers over another. Say in the case of going back to the days of the spinning jenny in the late 1700s and in the early 1800s, there were skilled weavers that would weave fabric and cloth, and that was their skill. But then a machine replaced that skill. Some of those went on to operate machines and do other phases of but that was a net displacement. The technology pretty much replaced that a trade-like skill, the fabric weaving. So that was a situation that created quite a difference there, and turned Britain, where they first used the spinning jenny, into the textile fabric manufacturing workshop of the world at the time, and for some years subsequently. So the robotisation thing, for various reasons, again, given the spread of time and the particular areas where it was adopted, things like motor vehicle manufacturing. I even saw it being used in manufacturing of computers and computer components. There was a high degree of robotisation there. Now, manufacturing went through a second phase where, instead of more intensely automating, manufacturing has moved off into the really low wage societies, China and Vietnam and elsewhere, the really low wage societies of the world, Mexico, which meant that instead of automating, the jobs were actually brought back into manual labour, and you just had thousands of people sitting at these desks, shoulder to shoulder, soldering on components, and that became the new manufacturing process, or the old new, if you like. So automation actually stopped at a certain point where, when the wage labour in the third world is so cheap that even the most efficient manufacturing, as in automated machinery, that doesn't that's still more expensive than the very cheap labour. And there are still plenty of places in China today and other parts of the third world where machinery is still a rarity. You know, the most complex piece of machinery they have is like a screwdriver and a soldering iron. So this is so the idea of automation, factory automation, actually stalled when manufacturers moved offshore to these cheap labour third world countries. So the trajectory that we see at any one time isn't necessarily how it'll all play out. And I'll go back again to the late 1700s, where there was and people have heard of this, called the Malthusian, Malthusian, the Malthusian theory. This is where Thomas Malthus looked at the rate at which populations increased and the rate at which food production increased. And he noted, quite correctly, by the way, in the time, he noticed the food production increased arithmetically, 1, 2, 3, 4, whereas population increased at the time geometrically. So, 2, 4, 16, and so on. So this idea of the population would grow at a much faster rate than food production, therefore mass starvation would occur. Now, there were various interceding factors that came in, such as better technology, fertilizers, more drainage, which increased the area of land under cultivation, more specialization, the rotating of crops, so that rather than have a completely fallow year where there's nothing grown on the block of land or a field or a pasture, to let the soil regenerate. Instead of doing that, you could plant other vegetables such as turnips, so you could still keep the land productive. You just produced different things. So these technologies and farming methodologies and animal husbandry and all sorts of using horses to cultivate fields instead of oxen, which was a new technology really at the time, when coupled with a new bridle for the horse, because the horse could turn in a much tighter circle than the oxen could, and so you could bring about 15 to 20% more of the land under cultivation than you could using oxen to till the field. So all of these things made a difference, so that food production actually increased at a faster rate than population production. Not that Thomas Malthus could have foreseen this. The technologies and the organisational structures to make that food production increase, that's something that was yet to occur. So, given the arithmetic and mathematics of the time and the available evidence at the time, Malthus's theory was quite correct. Just he couldn't factor in these technological and managerial innovations that were to occur later on. Also, things like transport, for the farmers would only grow as much food as they could sell. So fields were left underutilized, pastures were underutilized, because the farmer couldn't transport the fruit and vegetables or whatever else to the biggest markets, being the cities and the bigger towns. But with the advent of the railways, a farmer in for example, southwest England, hundreds of miles from London, could still produce fruit and vegetables or anything really, and flowers, whatever it might be in the farm, and could still have them transported to the following day, to arrive in London. Refrigeration again changed. It was a huge game changer. Farmers in Australia could sell their refrigerated lamb and beef and so on from Australia, could sell it in England and Europe because of refrigeration. So there are a lot of technologies came in to change things. Now, When motor vehicles were first started to be a thing, there were very few roads, and many of the roads were dirt roads and in pretty ordinary condition. And really, it was viewed that horse and cart was still going to be the only way to get around, because these motor vehicles would get caught in ruts and holes, and because of the condition of the roads, they get bogged and this and that, and they wouldn't be any good. But no one foresaw the extent of highways being built and these sort of things, which would allow motor vehicles to be used. So all sorts of developments can occur subsequent to the core original kernel of technology. But coming now to artificial intelligence, now the jobs that artificial intelligence is supposed to replace are the number one job that they claimed. And if you look at various articles here, it's pretty much the same thing. They all seem to be more or less agreeing on this, that teachers are the main jobs that are going to be affected. Now, some may say that's a good thing, but given that so many people are commenting that teachers teaching is one of the main jobs to be threatened by AI, and it may or may not be. I mean, that remains to be seen. I do see the logic behind that thought, or that sentiment. But teachers have now become globalist propagandists. So their role has actually changed. They're not teachers anymore, they're propagandists. They're more concerned about encouraging kids to be LGBTQ or trans or something than they are about teaching, history or whatever. So, or mathematics. So the idea is that teaching will return to a fairly neutral thing where the kids are taught, straight facts and just blandly given information. Now we see how the way AI is going, Chat GPT and so on. It's very clear that the wokerati globalist mob are concerned that if teachers who are propagandists now are replaced by artificial intelligence may just teach the facts and teach the real issues, give balanced perspective, give both sides of the debate and both sides of the story and so on. And this is terrifying to the globalists. They can't have this. All teachers have been turned into woke little propagandists. Some of them so insane that you can't believe they could get a job teaching or be even allowed anywhere near kids. But so the wokerati mob and the globalist funded wokerati mob, they want to make sure AI is completely woked and completely controlled, so it remains and captured by the globalist propaganda machine. So to what extent? I mean, if you're going to have propaganda here or there, why would you bother? You might as well keep the teachers there. Or will it create levels of teaching? For example, you can have a human teacher, but it's going to cost you $100. But if you have artificial intelligence teaching, it's going to cost you, $20 or $50 or something. So will there be economic incentives to choose one over the other? But clearly AI in any sort of teaching or information distribution sense, at least, the globalists won't want to let control of that slip from their own hands. So they'll keep that as a propaganda distribution mechanism. And I think that in turn will affect to what extent, if at all, it may replace teachers. Journalists are the same thing. Journalists, 95% of journalists are now globalist propaganda distributors. AI is touted as being, that's the second. Teachers are number one to be replaced. Journalists number two, or journalists and commentators. So let's suppose that's the case, that the journalists' jobs are really threatened. And I can see how AI can write articles. I get that. But again, it'll be, if it does go down that path, it'll be something that the globalists will want to maintain tight control of. The whole news media commentating journalist industry is 95% controlled by the globalists, and they won't want to let that control slip. So really, it's whether you get AI to write your propaganda or you get Rachel Maddow or Don Lemon or someone like that to do the propaganda. I mean, who cares? It's probably going to carry more sort of weight and you have a higher visual impact if you've got a person doing it. But the AI could create some plausible, photogenic robot type image, graphic image to read the news, and that might work and have the same effect as a real person. The next one, the third industry that's supposed to be affected by AI is psychologists and psychiatrists. I don't know about that. I don't know enough about but again, most of those now are also propagandists and social engineers for the globalists. So again, I don't think the globalists will let that go. Now, one that really surprised me, the fourth most likely job to be replaced by AI was judges in courts, and the associated jobs that you'd see there, like say arbitrators, that sort of thing. So that's so they're assuming a sort of vanilla boilerplate thing here, like say somebody writing up a will, they would just go to an AI and the AI would ask, well, how many houses you got, and that sort of thing, and then it would spit out a will. So there's that, or even things like I don't know what the word is in the United States, but it's called conveyancing here in Australia, where in the UK as well, where say you're selling your house or you're buying a house for that matter, or residential property, that the legal paperwork you clearly identify the owner, you clearly identify the land and the buildings, the dwellings on it, that sort of thing, and make sure that it's all sort of legal and that all the documents line up and that sort of thing, that the surveyor's report is included and so on. So that's supposed to be something that could go with AI. And given how completely apolitical that is, then maybe that sort of stuff could. And I think anything that is 100% apolitical, where no one's got any sort of political, ideological, socio-ideological interest in it, just the purely bland stuff, then I don't doubt that AI could possibly do those. But all of these roles, teachers, journalists, commentators, psychologists, and judges and jurists and judicial officers, that's something where the globalists have an absolute, huge interest in controlling and affecting. So I can't see them letting that go. So I looking at the jobs that could be replaced, partially replaced, augmented, or where some of the repetitive drudge aspects of the job could be done by AI. I can see that. There's also another one on the list which tended to vary depending on what the issues were: telemarketers. Now, there was an AI telemarketer that was tested out by a firm that we were doing some work for not that long ago, and it was interesting, and it was kind of had some interesting aspects to it, but it still fell well short of what a human could do. Looking at just one example, the AI wanted to see a certain phone number that was making the call to make the inquiry. Now, that phone had been damaged, and you had to go through a fairly laborious separate process to register another phone number. Now, I didn't say that it would only accept one phone number. So when we called up on a different phone number, the response was the voice, the automated AI voice came back, I do not recognize that contact point. And contact point, what the fuck's a contact point? And then it just hung up. So it didn't give you an option to say, I don't recognize that contact point. Can you explain me why you're not calling from a certain? So there were limitations, and these automated things are all very good, but someone's got to put in the original data and the original data sets and the breadth of the contextual grasp of the issues, and that is no easy task to think of every possible permutation. And even when you're dealing with a person who doesn't speak particularly good English, for example, on some of these telephone support things, even that's a major chore. And how they've been trained and so on. Or if you've gone in with an elderly relative to take them into some sort of medical centre, and nearly every medical receptionist these days is someone who doesn't speak English as a first language. And they're also, a lot of them have very low IQs, and they've just been trained to, do this, do that, push that button. And so it's very hard to get things done. And I don't think AI would be a step forward with a lot of that, or it may evolve over time. So I just don't see AI being the sort of threat that a lot of the hysterical media is talking about. Having said that, let's assume a situation where standards, because we're on a downhill slide with standards all across the West, less and less qualified. There's more and more people who are less and less qualified filling a whole range of roles, from not just receptionists or so on, but middle management, upper middle management, this sort of thing. And I'm constantly staggered at the poor quality of people that are being put into even vice president type roles now. It's astonishing that the people of that limited ability and limited intellectual capacity could be given anything resembling a role of that seniority. But we're in a downhill slide. So if we accept AI is not just going to replace people, but it will signal a huge reduction in standards of service and service delivery. And if you look at the you'll own nothing and be happy type World Economic Forum thing, then if all the access to goods and services is controlled by just a small handful of organizations, multinational organizations, then they don't really give a fuck about services. They don't have to compete. And if you want whatever they've got, and especially if you've got to have it to survive, then it's up to you to climb over all the cut glass to get to it. It's not up to them to deliver it to you or even make it easy for you. So that's a possible direction things could go in. But that's an overview of AI from my perspective. And you've been with Tacitus today, and thank you for listening.